The airport buzzed with the usual weekend rush. People wheeled suitcases across the shiny floor, some running to catch flights, others waiting in lines that seemed to stretch forever. Among them stood 16-year-old twins Amara and Asha Taylor, their matching purple backpacks and carefully packed suitcases beside them. This was their first time traveling alone, a milestone their father had finally agreed to after weeks of begging. "I think we're supposed to go to that counter," Amara said, pointing to the check-in area where a line had already formed. She was the more confident twin, always the one to speak up first. Asha nodded, double-checking the flight details on her phone. "Flight 372 to Atlanta, leaving at 2:15. We've got plenty of time." The girls joined the line, excitement bubbling inside them. Their grandmother hadn't seen them in almost a year, and she had promised to take them to the music festival they'd been talking about for months. Plus, 2 weeks away from home without their overprotective father hovering nearby felt like freedom. When they reached the counter, the airline employee, a middle-aged woman with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, barely looked at them as she asked for their IDs. "We're minors," Amara explained, sliding their student IDs and the permission forms their father had signed across the counter. "Dad said these forms should cover everything." The woman frowned, tapping at her keyboard. "There seems to be an issue with your reservation." She didn't elaborate further, just continued typing, her frown deepening. "What kind of issue?" Asha asked, her voice smaller than her sister's. "We have the confirmation email." She held up her phone, showing the message that clearly displayed their flight details and booking reference. "I'll need you to step aside so I can assist other passengers," the woman said, not addressing their question. "Wait over there." She pointed to a small seating area away from the main check-in. The twins exchanged confused glances but did as they were told, wheeling their suitcases to the designated waiting area. From there they watched as passenger after passenger approached the counter, checked in and headed toward security. Some spent less than 2 minutes at the counter. The girls had now been waiting for 20. "Should we go ask again?" Asha whispered, anxiety creeping into her voice. Before Amara could answer, a different airline employee approached them, a man with a receding hairline and glasses perched on the edge of his nose. "Taylor?" he asked, glancing down at a tablet in his hand. "Yes," both girls answered in unison. "We're having some system verification issues with your tickets," he explained, his tone flat and uninterested. "We're working on it." "But what's the problem exactly?" Amara pressed. "Our dad booked these weeks ago. As I said, it's a system issue. Please continue to wait." With that, he walked away, leaving the twins more confused than before. Another 30 minutes passed. The departure board showed their flight was now boarding. Panic began to rise in Asha's chest. "Amara, we're going to miss our flight," she whispered, her hands fidgeting with the zipper of her jacket. Amara stood up, determination flashing in her eyes. "This isn't right. Everyone else is getting through fine. I'm going to ask again." As Amara approached the counter again, Asha looked around the terminal. Something caught her attention, a pattern she hadn't noticed before. The few other black passengers she could see were also waiting, while white travelers moved through the line with ease. A sick feeling formed in the pit of her stomach. "Excuse me," Amara said to yet another employee who had replaced the blonde woman. "We've been waiting for almost an hour now. Our flight is boarding, and no one has told us what the problem is." The new employee, a man with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, sighed as if Amara was being a nuisance. "There's a security protocol we need to follow for unaccompanied minors. Please return to your seat." "But those kids over there just went through." Amara pointed to a group of younger white children being escorted to the security line by an airline representative. "They're traveling alone too." "Every situation is different," he replied dismissively. "We'll call you when we're ready." Amara rejoined her sister, frustration evident in the set of her shoulders. "This doesn't make any sense." An older woman sitting nearby leaned over. "I couldn't help overhearing," she said quietly. "I've been watching for the past half hour. They're not treating you girls right. The twins exchanged looks, unsure how to respond. You should call your parents, the woman continued. This isn't normal procedure. Asha pulled out her phone. Maybe she's right, Amara. Dad would know what to do. Amara hesitated. Their father, Raymond Taylor, had always taught them to handle situations on their own, to be independent and resourceful. Calling him might seem like they couldn't manage without him. But as the final boarding call for their flight echoed through the terminal, she nodded in agreement. Asha dialed, her hand slightly shaking. Their father answered on the second ring. Dad, Asha said, her voice cracking slightly. We have a problem. As Asha explained the situation, Amara watched the departures board. Their flight status changed from boarding to final call. Dad wants to talk to someone in charge, Asha said, holding out the phone. Amara took it and marched back to the counter, a new confidence in her step. My father wants to speak with a supervisor, she stated firmly. The employee looked like he wanted to dismiss her again, but something in her expression made him hesitate. He picked up a phone at the counter and made a brief call. Minutes later, a woman in a blazer with a manager's badge approached. I understand there's an issue, she asked, her tone professionally neutral. My father would like to speak with you, Amara said, holding out the phone. The manager took it reluctantly. This is Supervisor Chen speaking. Her expression shifted as she listened to whatever Raymond was saying on the other end. I see. Yes, sir. I understand. Of course. The twins couldn't hear what their father was saying, but the change in the supervisor's demeanor was immediate. Her back straightened and she began typing rapidly at the nearest computer. Yes, Mr. Taylor, I'm looking at their reservation now. No, there doesn't seem to be any flag on the account. I completely understand your concern. Her eyes flicked, briefly to the twins. Yes, they'll be on that flight. I'll personally escort them. When she handed the phone back to Amara, her smile was strained. There appears to have been a misunderstanding. You're cleared to board now, but we'll need to hurry. As the supervisor grabbed a radio and began making arrangements to hold the plane, Amara put the phone to her ear. Dad? What did you say to her? Just the truth, Raymond replied, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel that the girls recognized. It was the same tone he used in business meetings when someone underestimated him. Sometimes people need a reminder of who they're dealing with. The girls knew their father was important. He was the CEO of a major tech company. But he rarely used his position to get special treatment. He had always taught them to stand on their own merits, not his name. I'll call you when you land, he said. And girls? Remember what I've always told you. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, the twins recited together, a lesson he'd instilled in them from an early age. Exactly. Now go catch your flight. As they followed Supervisor Chen through a special security lane and toward their gate, Asha whispered to her sister, Do you think this happened because... She didn't finish the thought, but Amara knew what she meant. It wasn't the first time they'd experienced something like this, though perhaps never so blatant. Probably, Amara whispered back. But Dad always says how we respond is what matters. What neither of the girls knew was that their father wasn't just making a complaint. As they finally boarded their flight, Raymond Taylor was making a call that would send shockwaves through the entire airline. This wasn't just about his daughters catching a flight anymore. This was about something much bigger, a pattern that had gone unchallenged for too long. As the plane's doors closed behind them, the twins settled into their seats, unaware that their simple trip to visit their grandmother was about to spark a chain reaction nobody could have predicted. Amara and Asha settled into their seats, the adrenaline from their check-in ordeal still coursing through their veins. The plane hadn't taken off yet. The captain announced a brief delay due to paperwork issues. The twins exchanged knowing glances. Do you think Dad is still on the phone with them? Asha whispered, buckling her seatbelt. Amara shrugged, looking out the small window at ground crew scurrying around. Maybe. He sounded pretty upset. A flight attendant walked by, pausing at their row. Are you two the Taylor girls? She asked, her smile overly bright, almost nervous. Yes, they answered in unison. The captain wanted me to personally welcome you aboard. If you need anything at all during the flight, just let me know. She handed them each a small package of cookies that other passengers weren't receiving. As she walked away, Asha leaned closer to her sister. Okay, that was weird. What did Dad say to these people? Before Amara could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from their father. Plane should be taking off soon. Call me the minute you land, love you both. The message seemed normal enough, but the girls knew their father well. The fact that he knew about the delay before the captain had even announced it to passengers meant something significant was happening and the scenes. 20 minutes later, the plane finally began to taxi. The twins relaxed into their seats, relieved to finally be on their way. But the tension from their experience lingered. I keep thinking about those other kids, Amara said, quietly. The ones who went right through. Asha nodded, understanding exactly what her sister meant. They didn't look anything like us. The girls had grown up in a household where these conversations weren't avoided. Their father had always been straightforward with them about the realities of being black in America. Knowledge is protection, he often told them. But experiencing it so blatantly still stung. Remember when Dad couldn't get a cab last year in Chicago? Asha said. And all those white businessmen kept getting picked up ahead of him? And he just stood there in his $1,000 suit, watching empty taxis drive past him, Amara added. He wasn't even angry. He just looked tired. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began to move about the cabin. The flight attendant who had welcomed them returned, this time with the lead. Flight attendant. Is everything okay with your seating arrangements? The lead attendant asked, crouching down in the aisle beside them. We'd be happy to move you to premium if you'd prefer. We're fine here, thank you, Amara replied, increasingly confused by the special treatment. The lead attendant nodded, handed them each a set of headphones that usually cost $5 and moved on. Other passengers were starting to notice the attention the girls were receiving, some looking on with curiosity, others with barely concealed annoyance. This is getting uncomfortable, Asha whispered. What is going on? Amara pulled out her phone and texted their father. Why is everyone treating us like VIPs now? It's weird. His response came quickly. The airline's regional director called me. They're addressing the situation. Just try to enjoy the flight. We'll talk when you land. The twins tried to settle in and watch a movie together, sharing earbuds, as they always did on trips. But the strange shift in how they were being treated made it hard to focus. Asha eventually dozed off, but Amara stayed awake, replaying the events at the check-in counter in her mind. She thought about the woman who had advised them to call their father. Without her encouragement, they might still be sitting in that waiting area, while their flight left without them. Amara wondered how many other people had faced similar treatment but didn't have a CEO father to call. The thought made her stomach knot. About an hour into the flight, Amara's phone buzzed again. It was a news alert, and the headline made her breath catch. Major tech CEO pulls corporate account from national airline over alleged discrimination. She quickly tapped the link, and there it was. A breaking news story about her father's company, Taylor Technologies, canceling their corporate travel contract with the airline they were currently flying on. The contract was reportedly worth millions. The reason cited was discriminatory treatment of CEO Raymond Taylor's daughters at check-in. The article didn't name the twins directly, but it mentioned they were minors traveling to visit family. Amara's hands trembled as she read. Further, according to the article, her father had not only pulled the contract but had also issued a statement saying his company would be reviewing all business relationships to ensure they only partnered with organizations that shared their values of equality and respect. He was quoted saying, "When my children can't board a plane without being profiled, we have a fundamental problem that must be addressed." She looked over at her sleeping sister, debating whether to wake her. Before she could decide, her phone buzzed with another text from their father. "You might be seeing some news. Don't worry. Just focus on having a good time with Grandma. I've got this handled." Amara replied immediately. "Dad, what did you do?" What needed to be done, came his simple response. The rest of the flight passed in a blur. Amara couldn't concentrate on the movie anymore, her mind racing with questions. By the time the plane began its descent into Atlanta, her sister had woken up and Amara had shown her the article. "This is going to be everywhere," Asha said, her eyes wide. "Dad never makes public statements like this." "He's really angry," Amara agreed. "I've never seen him use the company like this before." As the plane touched down, both their phones began buzzing with notifications. Friends had seen the news and were texting to ask if they were okay. Their group chats were exploding with messages of support and questions about what had happened. The flight attendant who had first greeted them appeared at their side the moment the seatbelt sign turned off. "We've arranged for you to be the first off the plane," she said, her professional smile now strained. "Someone will escort you to baggage claim." The girls gathered their belongings in silence, acutely aware of the stares from other passengers, who might have connected them to the breaking news. As promised, they were the first to exit, where a harried-looking airline representative waited to escort them through the terminal. "Your grandmother has been notified of your arrival and is waiting in the designated area," the representative said, walking briskly. "Again, on behalf of the airline, we sincerely apologize for any inconvenience you experienced today." The twins followed, exchanging looks. This wasn't the adventure they'd imagined when they'd begged their father to let them fly alone. Their grandmother, Vivian, was waiting exactly where the representative had indicated, her arms outstretched. At 70, she was still a force of nature, with her silver-streaked dreadlocks and bright yellow dress making her impossible to miss in the crowd. "My babies," she exclaimed, pulling them both into a tight hug. "What a day you've had." She held them at arm's length, examining their faces. "Are you okay?" "We're fine, Grandma," Asha assured her, though her voice lacked conviction. Vivian didn't look convinced. "Well, your father called me, told me what happened and what he did about it." She shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "That man always was quiet until pushed too far. Then watch out." As they collected their luggage and headed to the parking lot, Vivian kept one arm around each girl. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said softly. "He always said change doesn't come from staying quiet when wrong is done." The ride to Vivian's house was filled with her steady stream of conversation, updating them on neighborhood news and her garden's progress, carefully avoiding the topic of what had happened at the airport. The twins were grateful for the normalcy, but as they pulled into the driveway of the little blue house where their father had grown up, Amara's phone rang. It was Raymond. "You're at Grandma's?" he asked when she answered. "Just got here," Amara confirmed. "Dad, the news—" "I know," he interrupted. "Listen, girls, I want you to enjoy your time with Grandma. Don't worry about any of this. But we need to talk about what happens next." "What do you mean, what happens next?" Amara asked, putting the phone on speaker so Asha and their grandmother could hear. Raymond's voice was steady, resolute. "This isn't just about what happened to you two today. It's about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else tomorrow." The twins looked at each other, then at their grandmother, who nodded with understanding in her eyes. "What are you going to do?" Asha asked. "What needs to be done?" Raymond replied, echoing his earlier text. "But first, I need to ask you both something important." The girls waited, sensing the weight of whatever was coming. "Are you willing to tell your story?" he asked finally. "Because people need to hear it. Not just what happened, but how it made you feel. It won't be easy, but it might make a difference." There was silence in the car as the twins considered his words. Finally, Amara spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "If it helps stop this from happening to someone else," she said, "then yes." "Me too," Asha added. "Okay," Raymond said, the relief evident in his voice. "We'll talk more tomorrow. For now, hug Grandma for me and try to relax. The storm's coming, but we'll weather it together." As they hung up, Vivian looked at her granddaughters with pride. "Your father is right. There's a storm coming, but sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air." The twins nodded, understanding that their simple trip had become something much bigger than they could have imagined. And somehow, they knew that. Walking into this storm with their father was exactly what they needed to do. The morning sun streamed through the curtains of their grandmother's guest room, casting warm patches of light across the twin beds. Amara woke first, reaching for her phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up with dozens of notifications, messages from friends, news alerts, and several missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. She sat up quickly, scrolling through. The headlines. Their story had exploded overnight. Tech CEO takes stand against airline discrimination, read one. Father's fury. How two teenage girls sparked a corporate showdown, declared another. There were already think pieces analyzing the economic impact of Taylor Technologies pulling its business from the airline. Asha, she whispered, throwing a pillow at her still sleeping sister. Wake up. This is getting crazy. Asha groaned, pulling the blanket over her head. 5 more minutes. You need to see this now, Amara insisted, getting up to sit on the edge of her sister's bed. She held out her phone, showing the news feed. Asha reluctantly emerged from her cocoon, squinting at the bright screen. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the article. Oh my God! The sound of their grandmother's voice floated up from downstairs, followed by another voice they immediately recognized, their father's deep, measured tones. Dad's here? Asha jumped out of bed, suddenly wide awake. They dressed quickly and rushed downstairs to find Raymond sitting at the kitchen table with their grandmother, both nursing cups of coffee and speaking in low, serious voices. They looked up when the twins entered. There they are, Vivian said warmly. Raymond stood and embraced his daughters, holding them tightly for a moment before stepping back to look at them. Despite having flown all night, he looked impeccable in his usual crisp button-down shirt and tailored pants. But the girls noticed the slight shadows under his eyes. I wanted to be here in person for this conversation, he explained, gesturing for them to sit. Things are moving faster than I anticipated. Vivian placed plates of breakfast in front of everyone, her famous blueberry pancakes, but the twins were too anxious to eat. Dad, what's happening? Amara asked. My phone is blowing up with messages. Raymond took a deliberate sip of coffee before answering. The response has been significant, more than I expected, to be honest. The airline stock dropped 8 points this morning, Vivian added, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. It's not just about the contract we pulled, Raymond continued. Other companies are questioning their relationships with them too, and people are sharing their own stories of being profiled at airports. So what happens now? Asha asked quietly. Raymond set down his mug and looked at his daughters with an expression they rarely saw. Uncertainty mixed with determination. That depends partly on you, he said. The airline CEO called me at 3 a.m. They want to meet. They're talking about policy reviews, sensitivity training, the works. But they're also concerned about public perception. They've offered compensation, upgrades, whatever we want. They're trying to buy your silence, Vivian muttered, shaking her head. Essentially, Raymond agreed. But here's where it gets complicated. A national morning show wants to interview you both. They want to hear directly from you what happened. The twins exchanged glances, the weight of this decision settling over them. If you choose to do this interview, Raymond continued, it keeps the conversation going. It might help push for real change, but it also puts you in the spotlight in a way you've never experienced before. And if we don't? Asha asked. Raymond shrugged. We can issue a statement saying the matter has been resolved privately. The story will probably fade in a few days. The airline makes some internal changes maybe. Life goes back to normal. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Vivian reached out and placed her weathered hands over the girls. Your grandfather, she said softly, used to say that comfort is the enemy of change. Amara thought about the woman at the airport who had encouraged them to call their father, about the other black passengers who had been waiting while others boarded, about all the stories their father had told them of times he'd been followed, in stores, passed over for opportunities, or treated with suspicion despite his success. "I want to do the interview," she said suddenly, surprising even herself with her certainty. All eyes turned to Asha, who looked down at her untouched pancakes. Unlike her sister, she'd always been the shy one, uncomfortable with attention. "But," slowly she nodded, "me too. If we don't speak up, who will?" Raymond's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it and sighed. "That's my PR team. They want to prep you if you're going to do this." He looked at his daughters with a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you absolutely sure? Once we go down this road..." "We're sure, Dad," the twins said in unison. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Raymond's public relations team arrived at Vivian's house, transforming her cozy living room into an impromptu media training center. The twins were coached on how to tell their story clearly and concisely, how to handle difficult questions, and what to do if they felt uncomfortable during the interview. "Remember," said Patel, the head of PR, "you're minors. You can stop the interview at any time. Your father will be just off camera, and he can step in if needed." By mid-afternoon, a car arrived to take them to the local TV studio, where they would be patched into the national broadcast. Vivian hugged them tightly at the door. "Stand in your truth," she whispered to them. "That's all you ever need to do." In the car, Raymond briefed them on some breaking developments. "The airline's CEO is doing damage control. They've issued a public apology and suspended the staff involved pending an investigation." "Is that good?" Asha asked. Raymond's expression was measured. "It's a start. But real change takes more than a press release." The TV studio was smaller than they'd imagined, but still intimidating with its bright lights and technical equipment. Makeup artists fussed over them, producers attached microphones to their clothing, and a floor director gave them last-minute instructions about where to look and how to sit. Raymond stood nearby, watching everything with careful eyes. Just before they went live, he approached his daughters and knelt between their chairs. "No matter what happens," he said quietly, "I am so proud of you both. You're braver than I was at your age." "We learned from you, Dad," Amara replied, surprised to feel tears welling in her eyes. The floor director counted down. 3, 2, 1. The host's voice came through their earpieces, introducing the story to millions of viewers across the country. And then suddenly they were on, their faces beaming to TV screens everywhere. "Amara and Asha Taylor, thank you for joining us today," the host began. "You've been through quite an ordeal. Can you tell us in your own words what happened at the airport?" Amara took a deep breath and began their story just as they'd practiced. She described the inexplicable wait, the vague explanations, the growing realization that something wasn't right. Asha then spoke about noticing other passengers, specifically white passengers, moving through quickly while they were held back. "How did that make you feel?" the host asked. The twins looked at each other. This wasn't one of the questions they'd prepped for. "Small," Asha said finally, her voice quiet but clear. "It made me feel small, like I didn't matter, like the rules were different for me because of how I look." "And angry," Amara added. "Not a shouting kind of angry, a sad kind, because we shouldn't still be dealing with this in this day and age, and we're lucky we had our dad to call. What about people who don't have someone like that?" The interview continued, with questions about their father's response and what they hoped would come from the situation. They answered thoughtfully, sometimes looking to Raymond for reassurance, but mostly finding strength in each other. "What would you say to the airline staff who held you back?" the host asked in what was clearly intended to be the emotional climax of the segment. The twins hadn't discussed this question with the PR team. They looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that only twins can have. Amara nodded slightly, letting Asha take this one. "I would say," Asha began, choosing her words carefully, "that I hope they think about why they did what they did. Really think about it. And I hope the next time they see someone who looks like me, they remember this moment and make a different choice." When the interview ended, the studio erupted in quiet applause. The producer rushed over, beaming. "That was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Raymond embraced his daughters, whispering, "You did great." Back in the car, the twins sat in exhausted silence, the adrenaline of the broadcast fading. Raymond's phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls, but he ignored them all, focusing, instead, on his children. "Are you okay?" he asked. Amara nodded, staring out the window at the passing cityscape. "I think so. It felt important, like we were speaking for a lot of people who never get heard." "The airline CEO wants to meet with us tomorrow," Raymond said. "All three of us. He's flying in specifically." "Do we have to?" Asha asked, the fatigue evident in her voice. Raymond shook his head. "No, we don't have to do anything. This is your story too, not just mine. You get a say in how it ends." The twins considered this as the car pulled up to their grandmother's house. Vivian was waiting on the porch, beaming with pride. "I watched it live," she called as they approached. "You were magnificent." Inside, she had prepared a feast, all their favorite foods laid out on the dining table. "I figured you might be hungry after changing the world," she said with a wink. As they sat down to eat, Raymond's phone rang again. He glanced at the screen and his eyebrows shot up. "I should take this one," he said, stepping into the next room. The twins could hear the murmur of his voice but couldn't make out the words. When he returned, his expression was unreadable. "Who was that?" Amara asked. Raymond sat down slowly. "That was Congresswoman Wallace. She's the chair of the Transportation Committee. She saw your interview." He paused, looking at each of his daughters. "She wants you to testify at a hearing next month about discrimination in air travel." The dining room fell silent as the implication sank in. "Congress?" Asha whispered, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. "Like the actual Congress?" Raymond nodded. "It would mean telling your story again, but this time to people who can actually change the laws." Vivian reached across the table and squeezed her granddaughter's hands. "From a check-in counter to the halls of Congress," she said softly. "Sometimes the smallest moments can lead to the biggest changes." Amara and Asha looked at each other, overwhelmed by how quickly their lives had transformed. What had started as a simple trip to visit their grandmother had become something none of them could have imagined. "We need to think about it," Amara said finally. Raymond nodded, understanding. "Of course, take all the time you need." He smiled at his daughters, his eyes filled with both concern and immense pride. "Whatever you decide, you've already done something remarkable. You spoke your truth. And people listened." The next morning brought with it a surreal calm. Amara stood on her grandmother's back porch, watching the sun rise over the garden as she sipped the hot chocolate Vivian had prepared. Her phone, silenced after the barrage of notifications yesterday, sat heavy in her pocket. The sliding door opened behind her and Asha joined her, wrapped in one of their grandmother's colorful handmade quilts. "Couldn't sleep either?" Amara asked. Asha shook her head. "I keep thinking about what Congresswoman Wallace said." Their father had explained more over dinner last night. The Transportation Committee was already planning hearings on discrimination in air travel, sparked by a recent report showing disproportionate security checks for passengers of color. The twins' experience had put a spotlight on the issue at exactly the right moment. "Do you think we should do it?" Amara asked, turning to her sister. "Testify?" Asha leaned against the porch railing, her expression thoughtful. "Part of me is terrified, but another part keeps thinking about what Grandma said about Grandpa, that comfort is the enemy of change." The back door opened again, and Raymond stepped out, already dressed for the day in his usual impeccable style. Early risers, he observed, joining them at the railing. Big day ahead. The airline CEO, Victor Harrington, was flying in specifically to meet with them. The meeting was set for 2 p.m. at a neutral location, a conference room at a downtown hotel. "We don't have to go," Raymond reminded them. "We can cancel." "No," Amara said firmly. "We want to hear what he has to say." Raymond nodded, pride evident in his eyes. "There's something else you should see." He pulled out his tablet and pulled up a social media page. "This started trending last night after your interview. The hashtag #ThouAreFlyingWhileBlack had thousands of posts, people sharing their own experiences of being profiled, delayed, or subjected to extra scrutiny at airports across the country. People are listening, Raymond said quietly. Your story opened a floodgate. By the time they arrived at the hotel that afternoon, the twins had made their decision. They would testify before Congress. The opportunity to speak directly to lawmakers about something so personal yet so universal felt like a responsibility they couldn't decline. The hotel lobby was busy with business travelers, none of whom gave the family a second glance as they followed a staff member to a private conference room. Inside, 3 people stood when they entered. A woman they recognized as the airline's chief communications officer from news appearances, a man in a conservative suit who was introduced as legal counsel, and Victor Harrington himself, the CEO. Harrington stepped forward immediately, hand extended. He was shorter than Raymond, with silver hair and the deep tan of someone who spent considerable time on golf courses. Mr. Taylor, he said, shaking Raymond's hand firmly before turning to the girls. And Amara and Asha, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. The formalities were brief. Everyone took seats around the polished conference table. Water was poured. Pleasantries exchanged. Then Harrington leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. First, he began, looking directly at the twins, I want to offer my personal and sincere apology for what you experienced at our check-in counter. It was unacceptable. The communications officer nodded encouragingly, clearly pleased with this opening. The lawyer remained impassive. We've conducted an initial review, Harrington continued. The staff involved have been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. But more importantly, we recognize this isn't just about individual employees. It's about systemic issues that need addressing. He outlined a series of steps the airline planned to take. Mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, a review of check-in protocols, the establishment of a diversity and inclusion officer position reporting directly to him, and a third-party audit of their practices. Additionally, he said, his voice taking on a rehearsed quality, we'd like to offer your family lifetime premier status on our airline and a contribution in your names to a charity of your choice focused on racial equality. The communications officer smiled broadly at this, clearly expecting gratitude. The lawyer remained stone-faced, watching Raymond carefully. Raymond's expression didn't change. And what about the other families? He asked quietly. The ones without a CEO father to call? The ones whose stories didn't make national news? Harrington's smile faltered slightly. I'm not sure I understand. I think you do, Raymond interrupted. My daughters aren't the first to experience this treatment. The only difference is they had the resources and platform to make people listen. He pulled out his phone and opened the Malakau Flying While Black hashtag, sliding it across the table. Thousands of stories, many specifically mentioning your airline. The communications officer's smile disappeared entirely. The lawyer leaned forward, about to speak, but Harrington held up his hand, stopping him. You're right, the CEO said, surprising everyone in the room. He scrolled through the social media feed, his expression growing more troubled with each swipe. I had no idea of the scale. That's part of the problem, Amara said suddenly, finding her voice. You didn't know because you didn't have to know. All eyes turned to her, and she felt Asha squeeze her hand under the table in silent support. We're 16, Amara continued, gaining confidence. We've already learned to expect this kind of treatment. To prepare for it. To not be surprised by it, that's not right. And your apology to us doesn't help the person it happens to tomorrow, Asha added softly. Or the next day. Harrington was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. What would you suggest? The twins glanced at their father, who gave them an encouraging nod. This was their moment. Real transparency, Amara said. Publish your data on passenger treatment, delays, extra screenings, complaints, broken down by race and gender. Make it public every quarter. An independent oversight board, Asha suggested. Not just your employees or consultants. People from civil rights organizations who can actually hold you accountable. And compensation, Raymond added. Not just for my daughters. For anyone who can document this kind of treatment. The lawyer finally spoke up. That would open the company to significant liability. It would demonstrate genuine accountability, Raymond countered, and commitment to change. The communications officer looked ready to object, but Harrington silenced her with a look. He studied the Taylor family for a long moment, then did something unexpected. He closed his leather portfolio, sat back in his chair, and sighed deeply. "Off the record?" he asked, glancing at his team. "No PR? No legal filtering?" Raymond nodded, cautiously. "I've been CEO for 8 years," Harrington said. "In that time, I've focused almost exclusively on operational efficiency, profit margins, and shareholder value. I've delegated the people issues to HR and our diversity team." He paused, looking genuinely troubled. "That was a mistake. I see that now." He turned to the twins. "Your interview yesterday, my wife and I watched it together. We have granddaughters about your age." His voice grew quieter. "She asked me how I would feel if it had been them." The room fell silent. The communications officer looked uncomfortably at her notes. The lawyer studied his hands. "I need time to consider your suggestions," Harrington said finally. "Some will require board approval, but you have my word. This isn't just going away with a press release and some training sessions." "We've been invited to testify before Congress next month," Asha said, watching his reaction carefully. If Harrington was surprised, he didn't show it. "I assumed as much. Congresswoman Wallace has been pushing for hearings for some time." He looked directly at the twins. "If you choose to do that, you should know that I've already decided to testify as well, and I won't be defending our past practices." The meeting continued for another hour, diving into specific policies and procedures that needed review. The twins contributed insights that surprised even their father, observations about their treatment that he hadn't noticed, questions about policies that even Harrington couldn't answer. By the time they stood to leave, something had shifted in the room. What had begun as a carefully managed corporate apology had evolved into something that felt, unexpectedly, like the beginning of actual change. Harrington shook hands with each of them again at the door. When he reached Amara, he held her gaze a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for your honesty. It's not easy to hear, but it's necessary." Back in the car, Raymond looked at his daughters with newfound respect. "You two were remarkable in there. You spoke truth to power, and they listened." "Do you think he meant it?" Asha asked. "About making real changes?" Raymond considered this as their driver navigated the afternoon traffic. "I think he wants to. Whether he can push it through his board and shareholders is another question." He smiled slightly. "But he's about to face congressional hearings with you two as star witnesses. That's powerful motivation." When they arrived back at Vivian's house, they found her in the living room with an unexpected guest, the older woman from the airport, who had encouraged them to call their father. "Look who I found," Vivian said, beaming. "This is Dr. Eleanor Wright. She's been trying to reach you since yesterday." Dr. Wright stood, extending her hand to the twins. "I recognized you from the TV interview," she explained. "I wanted to make sure you were all right. Your grandmother was kind enough to invite me over when I called. Over tea and Vivian's homemade cookies." Dr. Wright explained that she wasn't just any passenger. She was a former civil rights attorney who now taught law at a nearby university. She specialized in transportation discrimination cases. "What happened to you has happened to countless others," she told them. "I've been documenting these cases for years, but without high-profile examples, it's been difficult to gain traction." She pulled out a business card and handed it to Raymond. "I'd like to offer my assistance, pro bono of course, with your congressional testimony. I've appeared before the Transportation Committee 3 times in the past decade, as the adults discussed the technical aspects of congressional hearings." Amara slipped outside to the back porch again, needing a moment alone. Asha followed a few minutes later. "Overwhelming, right?" Asha said, joining her sister at the railing. Amara nodded. 2 days ago, we were just going to visit Grandma and go to a music festival. Now we're meeting with CEOs and preparing for Congress. Are you having second thoughts? Amara considered this, looking out at the garden where their grandmother had taught them to plant vegetables when they were little. No, she said finally. I'm scared but not unsure. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Asha replied. I feel the same way. Their father stepped outside, phone in hand. You two have a moment? There's something else we need to discuss. The serious tone in his voice made both girls turn. The story has gone international, he said. News outlets from Europe, Asia, Africa, they all want interviews. And social media. He shook his head in amazement. The hashtag has over 2 million posts now. What does that mean for us? Amara asked. Raymond leaned against the door frame. It means we have decisions to make. How public you want to be. How much of your story you want to share. Whether you want to become the faces of this issue. We're already the faces of it, aren't we? Asha said quietly. For now, Raymond agreed. But you have options. You can do the congressional testimony and then step back. Let advocates and policy experts take the lead. Return to your normal lives. Or, Amara prompted, or you could lean into this moment. Use the platform you've been given. But that comes with costs. To your privacy, your time, potentially even your safety. The twins looked at each other, having another of their silent conversations. Finally, Amara spoke. We need time to think about it. Raymond nodded. Of course, there's no rush. He smiled at his daughters. Whatever you decide, I'm behind you. 100%. But remember, you're 16. You're allowed to just be teenagers, too. As he went back inside, the twins remained on the porch, watching the sun begin its descent behind the trees. The weight of the decision before them hung in the air. What do you think Grandpa would do? Asha asked suddenly, referring to the grandfather they'd never met but had heard so much about. The man who had marched with Dr. King, who had faced fire hoses and police dogs for what he believed in. Amara considered the question. I think he'd say that when the moment finds you, you can't hide from it. Asha nodded slowly. But Dad's right too. We're 16. Maybe it's not either or, Amara suggested. Maybe we can do the testimony, help shape whatever changes come from this, but still have our lives too. As they continued to talk, weighing options and imagining futures, one thing became increasingly clear to both of them. Whatever path they chose, nothing would ever be quite the same again. What had begun as a simple denial of boarding had become something much larger than themselves. It had become a moment of reckoning, not just for an airline, but for an entire system that had allowed such treatment to become routine. And somewhere, in that realization was both the burden and the power of the choice before them. The congressional hearing room buzzed with energy. Journalists positioned cameras, staffers shuffled papers, and committee members chatted in hushed tones on the elevated platform. Amara and Asha sat at the witness table, trying to appear calm despite the butterflies in their stomachs. 3 months had passed since that day at the airport. 3 months that had transformed them from ordinary teenagers into reluctant symbols of a movement. The twins had ultimately decided to testify but had declined most interview requests in the interim, focusing instead on finishing the school year and trying to maintain some normalcy in their lives. Their father sat between them, occasionally whispering reassurances. Behind them, their grandmother Vivian watched proudly, seated next to Dr. Eleanor Wright, who had spent weeks helping them prepare their testimony. Remember, Dr. Wright had coached them, speak your truth plainly. Don't try to sound like a lawyer or a politician. Your power is in your authenticity. At precisely 10 a.m., Congresswoman Wallace gavelled the session to order. Today's hearing of the House Transportation Committee will focus on allegations of discriminatory practices in commercial air travel, she announced. We have several witnesses who will share both personal experiences and professional expertise. The witness list included the twins, their father, airline CEO Victor Harrington, a representative from the Transportation Security Administration, and several civil rights experts. The twins would testify first. When their names were called, both girls took deep breaths. Amara squeezed Asha's hand under the table before they leaned toward their microphones. Thank you, Chairwoman Wallace, and committee members for inviting us to speak today. Amara began, her voice steadier than she felt. What happened to us that day was not unique or unusual. The only unusual part was that something was done about it. She recounted their experience clearly and concisely, just as they had practiced. When she finished, Asha took over, describing the emotional impact, the humiliation of being singled out, the frustration of vague explanations, and the disturbing realization that their race appeared to be the determining factor in their treatment. We recognize our privilege in this situation, Asha concluded. We had a father with the resources and influence to demand accountability. Most people don't have that advantage. We're here today to speak for them too. The questioning began, with committee members from both parties taking turns. Some were sympathetic, asking about the girls' feelings and the impact on their lives. Others were more skeptical, suggesting there might have been legitimate security concerns or questioning whether they might have misinterpreted the situation. Is it possible, one congressman asked, that what you experienced was simply poor customer service rather than racial discrimination? Amara leaned forward. Sir, we watched for over an hour as white passengers moved through the same check-in process without delay. We provided all requested documentation. We followed all instructions. The only difference was the color of our skin. The congressman persisted. But can you prove that was the factor? Before Amara could respond, Asha spoke up. Can you prove it wasn't? She asked quietly. This is the challenge we face every day. We experience these patterns repeatedly, but are told we must provide impossible proof before our experiences are believed. The room fell silent. Even the skeptical congressman seemed momentarily at a loss for words. When Victor Harrington testified later in the session, he surprised many by directly acknowledging the problem. After reviewing our data, he stated, we've found disturbing patterns in how passengers of color are treated compared to white passengers. The incident with the Taylor family forced us to confront a reality we should have addressed long ago. He outlined the steps the airline had taken since the incident. A comprehensive audit of their check-in and security procedures, new training, programs, and the establishment of an independent review board comprised of civil rights experts. Most significantly, he announced a new transparency initiative, quarterly public reports on passenger treatment metrics broken down by race, gender, and other factors. This level of accountability is unprecedented in our industry, he acknowledged. But it's necessary if we're serious about addressing these issues. When Raymond testified, he spoke not just as the twins' father but as a business leader. As CEO of a major technology company, I understand the pressures of running a large organization, but I also understand that leadership means taking responsibility for every aspect of your operation, not just the parts that affect your bottom line. The hearing continued for several hours, with expert testimony on the history and prevalence of discrimination in transportation. Throughout it all, the twins remained poised, answering follow-up questions thoughtfully and refusing to be rattled by the occasionally hostile interrogation. By the time the session adjourned, it was clear that their testimony had made an impact. Several committee members announced their intention to propose new legislation requiring greater transparency and accountability from airlines regarding their treatment and of passengers. As they left the hearing room, reporters swarmed around them, shouting questions. Raymond shielded his daughters, guiding them through the crowd toward a side exit where a car waited. You were magnificent, he told them once. They were safely inside. I couldn't be prouder. Vivian dabbed at tears in her eyes. Your grandfather is looking down and smiling today. Yes, indeed. Back at their hotel, the family gathered in Raymond's suite to decompress. The television was tuned to news coverage of the hearing, clips of the twins' testimony already being broadcast nationwide. So what happens now? Amara asked, kicking off her shoes and curling up on the sofa. Raymond muted the TV. Now, we have choices. In the months since the incident, he had been approached by numerous civil rights organizations asking the twins to become spokespersons. Universities had invited them to speak. Publishers had offered book deals. There was even talk of a documentary. I've held them all off until after the hearing, Raymond explained. I wanted you to get through this first, but now we need to decide, how involved do you want to be going forward? The girls exchanged looks. They had discussed this extensively between themselves over the past weeks. We want to help, Asha began carefully. But we also want to be teenagers, to finish school, go to college, have normal lives. Amara nodded. We don't want to be defined forever by what happened at that airport. That's completely understandable, Dr. Wright interjected. She had joined them at the hotel to debrief after the hearing. You've already done more than most people ever will to push for change. Raymond studied his daughters. What if there was a middle path, he suggested. A way to stay involved without sacrificing your privacy or your youth. Over the next hour, they outlined a plan together. Raymond would establish a foundation focused on transportation equity issues, named in honor of his father. The twins would serve as youth advisors, participating in key events and decisions but not becoming full-time activists. Most importantly, they would control when and how their story was used. Your voice, your choice, Raymond said. Always. 6 months later, the Taylor Transportation Equity Foundation held its inaugural conference. Leaders from airlines, railways, rideshare companies, and civil rights organizations gathered to discuss practical steps toward ending discrimination in all forms of transportation. The twins opened the conference with a brief speech, sharing the podium as they had throughout their journey. What happened to us was just one moment, Amara told the audience. But it revealed a system that has failed too many for too long. Change doesn't come from comfort, Asha added, echoing their grandmother's words. It comes from confronting uncomfortable truths and having the courage to address them. From the front row, Vivian beamed with pride. Beside her sat Victor Harrington, who had become an unexpected ally in their work. His airline's transparency initiative had already revealed significant disparities in passenger treatment, leading to concrete policy changes that other carriers were beginning to adopt. After the ITD's speech, as attendees mingled during a reception, a woman approached the twins with her teenage daughter. I just wanted to thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Last month, my daughter was traveling alone and experienced similar treatment. But because of the changes your story inspired, there was a new reporting system in place. She was able to file a complaint that was actually taken seriously. As the woman and her daughter moved on, the twins exchanged glances, a wordless understanding passing between them. The burden they had carried these past months suddenly felt lighter. That evening, back at home, the family gathered for dinner to celebrate the successful launch of the foundation. As they shared stories and laughter around the table, Raymond raised his glass in a toast. To my remarkable daughters, he said, who turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change. And to Grandpa, Vivian added, who always said that standing up for what's right is never easy, but always necessary. As the conversation flowed around them, Amara caught Asha's eye across the table. So much had changed since that day at the airport. They had testified before Congress, launched a foundation, and started a national conversation. Their story had been featured in major news outlets, and case studies about the incident were being taught in business schools and civil rights courses. But beneath all that, they were still just Amara and Asha, sisters, students, teenagers, with dreams and plans that went far beyond this one chapter of their lives. They had found a balance, contributing to the cause without being consumed by it. Later that night, as they sat on Amara's bed scrolling through social media, they came across a news update. The Airline Industry Association had announced new standardized guidelines for check-in procedures, explicitly prohibiting discriminatory practices and establishing clear accountability measures. Look at that, Asha said softly. Real change. Amara nodded, thinking back to the confusion and humiliation they'd felt that day at the airport. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't called Dad? If we just accepted it like probably thousands of others have? All the time, Asha admitted. But then I remember what Dr. Wright told us. That change often comes when someone finally says, enough. Outside, rain began to fall, a gentle patter against the windows. The sisters sat in comfortable silence, scrolling through college brochures. Next year would bring applications, campus visits, and decisions about their futures. Amara had become interested in law, inspired by Dr. Wright's mentorship. Asha was leaning toward journalism, drawn to the power of storytelling to shape public understanding. Whatever paths they chose, they knew their experience had changed them, not just in how they saw the world, but in how they understood their place within it. A text message dinged on both their phones simultaneously. A group message from their father. It was a photo of the front page of tomorrow's newspaper with the headline, "Transportation Department announces new anti-discrimination. Regulations cites Taylor incident as catalyst." Below the image, Raymond had written, "Your legacy. Never forget what you started." The twins smiled at each other, a mixture of pride and amazement in their expressions. What had begun as a simple trip to visit their grandmother had evolved into something neither could have imagined. They had spoken truth to power, and power had listened. They had turned pain into purpose, humiliation into hope. And while they knew the work was far from over, that true equality would require countless more voices and actions beyond their own. They had helped bend the arc of history, if only slightly, toward justice. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the world clean for a new day. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities. But tonight, in this quiet moment of reflection, the twins allowed themselves to fully appreciate the journey they had taken, from denied departure to a destination none could have foreseen. "We did good, didn't we?" Asha whispered. Amara nodded, wrapping an arm around her sister's shoulders. "We did good."